Welcome back to My Bake Escape. This week I have a simple recipe, but it is so delicious. I know you're going to want to make these really soon. The recipe I'm sharing with you today is a coconut macadamia nut cookie. These turned out delicious, and as I mentioned, they're pretty simple to make and only require a few ingredients. For the full recipe, visit mybakeescape.com. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at mybakeescape, and if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. I appreciate the support. So for this recipe, the main ingredient, the star ingredient, are macadamia nuts. You can get these pretty much anywhere. I think even Costco has them right now. I purchased these last year when I went to Hawaii. I got them from Costco, and what I did was I froze these. I kept them in the freezer, and so that keeps them nice and fresh. For this recipe, I need to toast them. So I'm going to go ahead and place them on a cookie sheet. I put about 3 cups of macadamia nuts on this cookie sheet, and I'm going to toast them in a 350 degree Fahrenheit oven for about 12 to 15 minutes. Just making sure to keep an eye on them, shake them around, toss them slightly throughout the baking so that the nuts around the edges don't burn. You just want to bake them until they start to turn golden brown and you can smell like that nutty, toasty aroma. So I went ahead and removed them from the oven, tossed them a little bit and let them cool, and you'll see how perfectly toasted they are. This releases a lot of the oils, and it makes them very fragrant, and it just gives them that nutty, toasty flavor. While the macadamia nuts cooled, I went ahead and measured out the other ingredients for the recipe. For this recipe, you will need unsalted butter, 2 sticks, all-purpose flour, brown sugar, granulated sugar, salt, baking soda, vanilla extract, eggs, macadamia nuts, shredded sweetened coconut, and white chocolate chips. The macadamia nuts have cooled completely, so I'm going to go ahead and chop these up. So I kind of chop them up in different sizes. I do some of them a little finer, and then I leave some kind of more larger chunks. This just gives a variety of texture to the cookie. You can use a nut chopper if you have one. I do have one, but for this I just decided to chop them up by hand. Once I chop them, I place them back in the bowl and set them to the side while I work on the dry ingredients. So to the flour, I add the salt, followed by the baking soda, and using a whisk, I mix this together. You can use a fork. You just want to make sure that the salt and baking soda are mixed into that flour nice and evenly. Next, I'm going to work on the wet ingredients. So to a large bowl, I add the 2 sticks of butter. The butter is room temperature, which is important so that it can cream together pretty quickly. So with the hand mixer, I start to beat the butter until it is nice and creamy and fluffy, and this takes about 2 to 3 minutes. Now that the butter is nice and fluffy, I'm going to go ahead and add the sugars. So I add the brown sugar and the granulated sugar to the butter. And with the hand mixer, blend these together until the mixture is light and creamy and fluffy. This will take about 3 minutes. Once the sugars have been incorporated into that butter, I go ahead and add the eggs. I like to crack my eggs into a separate bowl. This just helps remove any shells if they fall in there, or sometimes there's some things that come out in an egg and you'd hate to just throw that egg directly in your batter. So now that I have my eggs, I pour them into the butter and sugar mixture and mix these in. Then I add the vanilla extract, mix that in. Next step, I combine the dry with the wet. So I go ahead and pour in all of that flour mixture, and with the hand mixer, just mix these two together. So I want to mix until all the flour has been absorbed into that butter sugar mixture. I don't want to overmix this dough. Once it's mixed in, I went ahead and used a large spatula to just kind of bring the dough together. You'll see it is nice and thick. Now it's time to pour in the macadamia nuts, followed by the white chocolate chips, and then also the coconut, shredded coconut. This is sweetened shredded coconut that I'm using. Using a large spatula, I just start mixing these in, folding the ingredients into that cookie dough. You'll see it is pretty thick, and it'll take just a little bit of time to just mix that all in. Kind of press the nuts and coconut into the dough, just making sure that everything is evenly distributed throughout that cookie dough. And this is what it looks like. You can see the coconut flakes, the chunks of macadamia nuts, and the chocolate chips in there. It looks very delicious, and it hasn't even baked yet. So at this point, my oven has been preheating at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So now I'm going to go ahead and place the cookies on the cookie sheet. So to a parchment lined cookie sheet, and using a ice cream scoop, I went ahead and scooped out balls of cookie dough. I prefer to use an ice cream scoop to scoop out the cookie dough, but you can use a regular spoon, or you can eyeball it and just take out the same amount of cookie dough, roll it up in your hands, and place them on the cookie sheet. So I place these on the cookie sheet, allowing for about 2 inches between each cookie, so that when they spread, they will spread a little in the oven. They don't touch and merge into the other cookies. So I'm able to place 8 cookies on this cookie sheet, and I just kind of move them around a little bit so that they are evenly dispersed on the cookie sheet. Then I like to press the tops down just slightly. This gives them a little bit of help when they're baking in the oven to bake a little flat and not have a dome. So these are going to bake for anywhere between 15 to 18 minutes, maybe even 13 minutes, depending on how large your cookies are. Just keep an eye on them around the 11-minute mark. I like to rotate the pan midway through, and this is what they look like after 15 minutes. I remove the pan from the oven, and I let the cookies continue to bake on the sheet because the sheet is still warm. So they will continue to cook slightly on the cookie sheet while I let them cool for about 3 to 5 minutes. After that time, I transfer the cookies to a cooling rack to complete the cooling down process. They look so good to me. They're perfectly golden brown, and you can see those chunks of macadamia nuts, white chocolate chips popping up. After the cookies have cooled for about 10 minutes, I went ahead and tried one, and I just love the overall look of these cookies. They baked perfectly. They're golden brown on the bottom, and you can see chunks of the macadamia nuts and the white chocolate chips poking out on the top. The cookie is super tender, and the flavor is so delicious. They are buttery, and the macadamia nuts add that nutty, toasty, delicious texture and flavor, and the coconut lends to a very chewy cookie, and then the white chocolate chips just give that perfect hint of sweetness. Combined, these flavors make a delicious cookie. Now, if you don't like coconut, you can omit the coconut from this recipe. However, it will change the texture, and to be honest, I think the coconut is my favorite because it makes it a super chewy cookie, and I just love that chewy texture with that crisp buttery edge. I think you're going to enjoy this recipe. I hope you do. If you make this recipe, make sure leave me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. If you have questions, make sure to leave those comments as well, and I will try my best to respond. For the recipe, visit mybakeescape.com, or you can click the link in the description of this video. Now you can store the baked cookies in an airtight container on your counter for about 5 days. You can also freeze a cookie dough. What I like to do is I'll go ahead and scoop out all of the cookie dough on a parchment lined cookie sheet, and then I'll place the cookie sheet in the freezer for about 20 minutes so that they can harden up a bit. Store the frozen cookie dough balls in a freezer bag in the freezer up to 3 months. Once the dough has hardened in the freezer, I go ahead and place them in this labeled freezer bag. And when I want to bake fresh cookies, I remove the cookie dough balls from the freezer, place them on a parchment lined cookie sheet, and allow them to sit on the counter while the oven preheats. And then I bake these for about 15 to 17 minutes. The baking time can be a little longer if they are still frozen, so I just make sure to keep an eye on them, and then I have fresh baked cookies whenever I need. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a sweet day.